Let's pop over here then to my whiteboard, where I've already started now with my title, Money Laundering, Combating, I've called it, or Anti-Money Laundering. The whole point behind understanding about money laundering is that we can deal against it. We can stop it from happening, because money laundering, of course, is rife. So what is money laundering? Well, in the mid 1980s, I lived in London. I worked in the city for a building society, and I had a flat above the branch in Stoke Newington. Now, I didn't have a washing machine, so every Thursday I headed to the laundrette, where I'd sit there for a couple of hours and watch all my laundry going round and round and round and round the machines. Now, that's where the term money laundering comes from. Not a lot of people are aware of that. But Al Capone, who was a gangster in the 1930s in Chicago, I think, he used to launder money by opening up a chain of laundrettes around the city. Because back then, of course, laundrettes were all cash, weren't they? You put your money in the machine, etc. So he laundered all his ill-gotten gains through gangsterism and killing people. I think drugs were a certain part of what he did as well, through his laundrette. Hence, it's called money laundering. Anyway, that doesn't really make a lot of difference to money laundering. So how is money laundered, first of all, then? So let's put a few titles up here. So the first one is, how is money laundered then? And we need to understand how it's done. Well, there's 3 stages to anybody that wants to launder some money. There's 3 stages. Number 1 is placement. Now, this is where money is placed into the system. So it might be, for example, put into a bank account, or a casino, for example, or property is bought. Whatever it is, money goes into the system. Once it's in the system, they then have what's called layering. Layering. There you go. Now, layering is where the money in the system is kind of moved around to create confusion. So it might go into a bank account to start with, then the money is then transferred to an offshore bank account, then it's moved over to a shell company, used by the shell company to buy a property in London, and then the property is then sold and the money goes into another account. It's layered around to try and confuse the authorities. And then finally, you have integration. Integration is where the clean money, it comes out of the system as then put into the banking system properly without being needed to be laundered any further. So that's the system, really. If you want to understand how this works, there's plenty of programs on the telly. We were watching last night Payback, which was on ITVX, which is brilliant, about this Scottish gangster, and that was all money laundering. But the best program I've seen is Ozarks. It's on Netflix. It's about a financial advisor, actually, his family, who gets in trouble with drug dealers, and he has to move his family over to the Missouri Ozarks, which is a lake, massive lake, and golly, speed buggy kind of country. And he has to launder $500 million in 5 years, otherwise he's going to kill his family. It's really, really good. Tells you how money laundering works. Now, how do we tackle money laundering? That comes on to the key one now. How do we tackle it? Well, we tackle it with the law. So if I just put in there, dealing with money laundering. We have the law. We have an Act of Parliament called the Proceeds of Crime Act. So let's put that in there for you. The Proceeds of Crime Act. It's quite an old act now. It's 2002, which, is over 20 years old. So it's pretty heavy. Now, the Proceeds of Crime Act makes it a crime where you can be put away for up to 14 years in prison and an unlimited fine as well. So there's no mucking about here. It makes the crime, first of all, to conceal or disguise or deal with criminal money. So if you are dealing with criminal money, it's you're breaking the law. If you're part of the arrangement to launder the money, you're also breaking the law. So if you're facilitating it, as a financial advisor, you can be put away for 14 years as well. If you acquire or purchase criminal property as part of the deal, again, you are breaking the law as well. And if you fail to disclose a known suspect that you've come across, then you can be breaking the law. So if you're in the bank and somebody's laundering money, if you fail to disclose that, you're breaking the law, could go into prison for 14 years. And the big one is tipping off. If you tip somebody off, in other words, warn them that they've been investigated, you can be put away as well. And 14 years and unlimited fines enormous as well. If you fail to raise the alarm, then that's a 5-year sentence as well. I mean, Al Capone, who did the original money laundering, was only put away for 11 years, and that was for tax fraud. They didn't get him for money laundering in those days. So shows you the extent of the crimes. Now, what else has been created then by the authorities? Well, first of all, you're probably aware of the money laundering, the MLRO reporting officer, the money laundering reporting officer. Now, the MLRO, the Money Laundering Reporting Officer, has to be appointed in all firms, financial services firms, of course. Now, this person or team of people have to deal with all staff issues around money laundering, tipping off, etc. They have to deal with the training, etc. We'll come on to in a second. But they liaise then with the authorities, and they liaise with the National Crime Agency. So let's put those dudes down here, shall we? The National Crime Agency. Now, the National Crime Agency is a government team. It's operated by the government. Think Thunderbirds, Tracy Island, International Rescue, that sort of thing, because they liaise with all the other authorities. It's a UK-based organisation, but they liaise with all the worldwide authorities on money laundering. That's the National Crime Agency. Because obviously money laundering is a worldwide thing. We know that. It's not just based here. You've also got one final set of a body, if you like, called the Financial Action Task Force. Goodness gracious. The Financial Action Task Force. There we go. Now, the Financial Action Task Force is an organisation established to coordinate the international fight against money laundering and terrorist financing, which is what it's all about, isn't it? So you've got quite a lot of issues going on tackling the situation, haven't you, going on there? Now, as far as we're concerned in financial services, we have the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA. Now, the FCA have money laundering issues. So put the FCA up here for you. They have money laundering regulations. So they've created regulations because the FCA are responsible now for money laundering in the UK financial services sector. One of their primary objectives now is to ensure that markets are robust and that all authorised firms have systems in place in order to eradicate money laundering. So it's a major part of what they do, which makes absolute sense, isn't it? Now, the European Union, the EU, who of course we are not part of anymore, so don't think about that anymore. They've published several directives over the years. Yeah, several directives. Now, if you remember your studies about directives, a directive is published by the EU and you have to abide by it in your member country by creating your own law. And they had some interesting titles. They were called Third Directive, Fourth Directive, Fifth Directive, and a Sixth Directive as well. Now, all those directives have now been incorporated into UK law with the transition arrangements that we did when we Brexited. So there are lots of rules and regulations there. Let's talk about the big ones then for us. The big one that will affect you as a financial advisor, and I'll put this in red now, is customer due diligence, known as CDD. Now, customer due diligence is a requirement that you have to do, which means that you have to obtain people's identification. So you need a formal identification such as a passport, a council tax receipt maybe with the address of the person on there, some official documentation, and different firms operate different types of documentation that you need. Now, you need to require it as a mortgage advisor, mortgage broker. The lender often takes your identification into account, so they don't need to do it because you've obviously organised it yourself as well. Now, extra due diligence is required for politically exposed persons. You might have come across the phrase PEP. There you go. Lots of acronyms today. Got about 4 or 5 already for you. A politically exposed person is somebody who, because of their position in society, could be susceptible to bribery and corruption. I don't say, for example, the Prime Minister's daughter would be a politically exposed person because politically she's exposed, and if she was kidnapped or something, and she would be liable to all sorts of issues and aspects around money laundering, she could be influenced quite quickly. Therefore, you need extra special due diligence on those people. So that's an example for you. Now, CDD or customer due diligence is done electronically as well now. The search engines will do a search on somebody's money laundering that gives you a score. They go into the internet and they search information they need. So electronic identity verification now is quite a commonplace, which saves an awful lot of time, as you can appreciate, but that depends on how your operation works, your principal, your network, and what they require. One of the problems with extra identification and politically exposed persons, that sort of thing, is financial exclusion. Now, I always remember years ago, my old granddad, he worked for the council. He was a park keeper. Brilliant job. He just ran a park, And he retired at something like 62 or 61 or something. And he had to find a place for his pension to be paid. And I opened up a bank account with the building society I worked at for him. But he had no identification. The guy had no paperwork. He wasn't that kind of dude. So he would be what's called financially excluded. Because he lacks the paperwork to provide identification, then he's excluded from financial products. He can't open up a bank account nowadays. He couldn't open up have a mortgage or anything like that because you need identification. Now, my granddad never travelled abroad apart from when he was a desert rat in the war, and you didn't need a passport for that because the army took you there. He went further. He went for his holidays. It was Lowestoft, in Norfolk. So he had no identification. So financial exclusion's an interesting one. You have to be careful of that. Often lenders will take a letter from somebody who's to be relied upon, so a vicar, for example, or a social worker or a doctor. A letter of authority might be good enough, but you need to check the requirements. So that's financial exclusion. A couple other quick things for you, and we'll put these down here for you in black. The FCA require that you do a lot of training in money laundering. That's a big requirement now. Has been for years, of course. That means that all staff, you yourself, have to be regularly trained on anti-money laundering procedures to make sure that you're not noticing things, or you not to tip off, that sort of thing, and 14 years imprisonment. And you have to therefore do the training. Often people do like e-learning, don't they? You have to endure the annual e-learning course with the required test at the end. It's all a bit ridiculous sometimes, isn't it, when this sort of thing's done badly. But that's the training side of things, which you have to do. And the last point for you is record keeping. Always crops up, doesn't it? Record keeping. There you go. Let's put that in there for you. Record keeping. Under the regulations, the FCA require that you keep records of identification things for 5 years once the transaction was completed, until the client relationship ends as well. So that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Record keeping 5 years. Don't forget that one. Now, Al Capone, of course, was finally arrested, but he was imprisoned, as I mentioned, for tax fraud. So they never got him on money laundering charges. They didn't have such a thing in those days, of course. Of course, laundrettes. There was the 80s when I used to go down to the laundrette every week. I remember it fondly. They're staging a bit of a comeback. I don't know if you've looked at garage forecourts recently, but they've got these external laundrettes, completely computer operated. There's no people there. So you go in there with your laundry and you put your money in, and that's the garage forecourt laundrette. Maybe we're seeing the rejuvenation of laundrettes, but it was certainly an experience on a Thursday night for a couple of hours watching your laundry go round and round and round. But a long time ago. So that's a timely refresher for you on money laundering. I hope that's all been useful.